Good afternoon. We can't open a newspaper today without reading about fintech, Bitcoin, blockchain, crypto finance, and related subjects. So I'm going to give the big picture. What is crypto finance and why is it important? Why is it in fact the most important trend in the world today? So to put things in context, let's look at the world's problems. The other things that we read about in the media are various kinds of crises: terrorism, financial crises, natural disasters, climate change, and so on. But how important are these? Well, there's a very interesting study that was done by the Copenhagen Consensus. The Copenhagen Consensus is a group of over 60 economists, world-leading economists, including 7 Nobel Prize winners. And what they did is they didn't use their own subjective idea of what problems are important. They simply took the problems that were submitted to the United Nations by people from all over the world. And then they ranked them on 2 metrics. Firstly, they ranked them on, if this problem was solved, what impact would it have on the world? And secondly, how much does it cost to solve this problem? And then they ranked them according to, for every dollar spent, what difference would this make in the world? And the results are very interesting. Of course, the study is very detailed, but here's the summary. These are the top 3 areas. Number 1, removing trade barriers. Number 2, addressing health. And the components of health that ranked very highly, in fact, they ranked number 2, 3, and 4 on the list, were contraception for women, disease, and malnutrition. And then the third area was education, in other words, addressing illiteracy. So those are the biggest problems in the world. In other words, for every dollar spent, that's where you get the most results. And we can see this with, for example, the Gates Foundation. That's pretty much where they are spending their money. But let's look at this a bit more closely. The number 1 factor there is 30 times more effective than the second factor, which is contraception for women. And it's hundreds of times and thousands of times more effective than the items that are lower down on the list. So removing trade barriers is by far the best thing we can do in the world today if we want to improve things. So why should this be so? Well, it actually makes sense when you think about it, because all problems that you want to solve require resources. Doesn't matter whether it's education or the environment or creating products or trade, whatever it is, it requires resources. So not surprisingly, the world's richest countries have the best environmental record, they have the best health standards, they have the best education systems, and basically any metric that you look at, the wealthy countries do better on. And the poorest countries have the worst environmental record, and so on and so on and so on, because they simply don't have the money to do something about the problem. So it makes sense that if we want to address the world's problems, the first thing we should do is enable wealth creation. Because when you have wealth creation, then you have the resources to address all the other problems. Wealth creation is the fundamental driver of individual and social well-being. That's the bottom line. So that being the case, how do you generate wealth? Well, there's 4 main characteristics. If you look in the theory of economics and the studies that have been done, this is very clearly, these are the 4 factors that that are the drivers of economic wealth creation. So let's look at those. So first, secure property rights. Secondly, efficient trade. Thirdly, division of labor and specialization. And finally, economic network size. Why? Well, if you don't have secure property rights, then how can you even start the process of wealth creation? And in fact, a Peruvian economist, Hernando de Soto, has done some very interesting work on this for the last few decades. And he looked at wealthy countries and poor countries, and his conclusion was the wealthy countries have secure land titles. So people have security on their property, and then they can take the next step. They can go to the bank and say, look, I'm going to give this property, this land, as collateral. Please give me a loan. And then that loan can be used to finance starting a small business. And then they can start getting up the ladder of wealth creation. But just to clarify, what are secure property rights? Secure property rights means that you have an order, some system that's trusted by everybody, that says what belongs to who. If you don't have that, you've got chaos in the economy. You need an order that says what belongs to who, which property belongs to which person or entity. And the shocking thing is, 4 billion people in the world today are excluded from this. The majority of the world, 2/3 of the people in the world today, do not live in an environment where they have secure property rights. This is a huge problem. Next, efficient trade. Now, this is something that surprised me. We think of transaction costs as just being, well, that's just, economics, it's, numbers and so on. It's nice to make a little bit more money or whatever if you make things more efficient. But it's much bigger than that. Transaction costs are fundamental to wealth creation and economic well-being and social well-being. The interesting thing is today, if you look at costs, product and service costs, there's 2 main components. There's production cost and there are transaction costs. Those are the 2 fundamental components. So if you want to create a product, there's the material input, that's the production cost, and then there's transaction costs, negotiating, finding people to work for you, negotiating tariff barriers, finding customers, transaction fees, sending money that might take days to settle, sometimes weeks, bureaucratic hurdles, etc., etc. All those different things are transaction costs. There's basically 3 main components of transaction costs. Search costs, where Google helps a lot to make that cheaper. Bargaining costs, countries that have efficient bargaining, where there's a clear price and you agree on the price very quickly, do better than countries where it's an extended process of trying to find the right price. Slows down the transactions. And finally, enforcement costs, which comes back to property rights. In other words, if you have a contract, you've bought or sold a product or service, you can rest assured that that really belongs to you and it will remain with you. There's no corruption and forgery and all that kind of thing. Now, with that background, economists are starting to pay attention to this, and there's some very interesting studies that have come out the last few years. That top statistic is from Cambridge University, a journal published by Cambridge University. They found that if you reduce transaction costs across an economy by just 0.1%, you quadruple the wealth creation in that country. I mean, that boggles the mind. It's like, that can't be true. I mean, I had to read it again. I'm like, did they print this wrong or what? This can't be right. But when you think about it a little bit, it makes sense. Because every single thing that happens in the economy is a transaction. Everything that happens in the economy is a transaction. And if that transaction costs just 0.1% more, you add 0.1% to 0.1% to 0.1%, and it all adds up. And eventually, it's a huge drag on the economy. Now, stockbrokers know this. Stockbrokers encourage us to trade. There's many people that have done day trading and so on that have some theory of what they should do, and they do these trades and they think they're doing well because they're making a little bit of profit here and there, and then at the end of the month they sit with a loss. And they're like, what's going on here? And they look at their statements, and it's the transaction costs that get them. Every little transaction costs money. So this is exactly what happens in the economy. Transaction costs are a drag on the economy. You reduce them by a fraction, and the economy just balloons. So this we have to pay attention to. So if you can take a country like Argentina and you reduce their transaction costs across the economy, 0.1%, Argentina will reach the level that Switzerland is at. That's how important transaction costs are. But they're even more important than that, because transaction costs drive division of labor and specialization. For example, there's economists that say the reason that the Industrial Revolution developed in England and not in other parts of the world is because the transaction costs in England were lower, which means that more transactions happen, which means that you can divide labor more, which means you can have specialization, which means some people can spend their time inventing things. Very interesting. And of course, as we know, division of labor and specialization is what productivity comes from. One person can do more because they have better technology, better capital. So this is the driver of wealth creation as a result of low transaction costs. And then in turn, when you have low transaction costs, you can deal with more people. It's easier to find different trading partners and production partners, which takes us to the next final point, namely network size. If you have a community of really talented people, let's say you have a group of 30 people that are Bill Gates and Einstein and Mozart and Steve Jobs and so on, really, really talented people. And that's all they have, 30 people like that. They will not get very far. They'll be as poor as the poorest people in Africa, because each one of them will have to spend the whole day just figuring it out how to make food. But when you have a huge economy, you can specialize. Some people can do the food production, some people can write music like Mozart, others can do other things, scientific research and so on. So network size is really important, which is why it's not surprising that we have big countries have a lot of weight in the world, the United States and China and so on. And where are we with this today? Well, it doesn't look good. In Asia, 60% of the people are cut off from the world economy. They do not have bank accounts. They don't have access to the financial system. 60% in Asia. In South America, it's 65%. And in Africa, it's 80%. The majority of the world's population is cut off from the world economy. In other words, they can only use cash, which means they can only deal with the people that they see face to face. It's a very small community of economic trade. If we can link those up to the world economy, we'll see an explosion of wealth creation, because the majority of the world is not part of the economic system yet. So, with that as background, how do we go about solving these problems? There's basically two ways. We can use people-based systems, which is what we've done in the past, predominantly, or we can use technology-based systems. And of course, we always need both, but the question is, what's the ratio? And the difference between these two is that people-based systems do not scale beyond Dunbar's number. Dunbar's number is the number that says how many people can you remember well, and generally that's about 150 people. And if you go back in history, you'll see that natural communities have about that size. Even army units generally have a size of about 150, because that's how many you can remember. Once it gets beyond that, the order breaks down. You don't know the people anymore, so people start cheating each other because of the anonymity. But technology-based systems scale virtually without limit, so they can help us out on that area. So how will this play out? What if we could develop a technology that addresses the problems of wealth creation? What if we could develop a technology that secures property rights, reduces trading costs, and integrates people in the world economy? That technology is crypto finance. Why do I say that? Crypto finance is a word that comes from the Greek word kryptos, means a secret. So crypto finance is about using the science of cryptography that encrypts messages so that only the intended parties can read that message. So this addresses the problem of being cheated or information being misused and so on. For example, in a banking transaction, if we did not have cryptography, then it would be very easy for hackers to steal our money. Cryptography is what keeps things secret so that only authorized people can read the message or use the information. So that's the basic idea behind cryptography. But let's look at it in a bit more detail. A very important part of cryptography is digital signatures, cryptographic digital signatures. Cryptography and crypto finance uses digital signatures to secure property rights and to reduce trading costs, and thereby to dramatically extend division of labor and specialization and increase network size. Because if you can send a message to someone, then you don't need to trust. If you can send a cryptographic, secured, digital signed message to someone, then you can trust that only the intended person can see it. And you can use cryptographic systems that secure property titles so that unauthorized people cannot change that property title. Let's look at this in more detail. Before that, so basically the conclusion from that is, if you have this kind of technology, it addresses all the points that we looked at for wealth creation. And as a result, we'll see the most dramatic explosion of wealth creation we've ever seen in history. And more specifically, crypto finance offers algorithmic security. In other words, there's less of a need to depend on human compliance and security measures. The technology itself ensures the integrity of the transactions. And the technology also makes the transactions faster and cheaper. So now, within the crypto finance ecosystem, what are the main kinds of technologies? There's basically two main categories. We read about blockchain technologies today all the time. It's all the rage, everyone talks about it, everyone is trying to do something with the blockchain. And that's for good reason. It's an extremely important invention. It's what brought about the whole crypto finance space. But the blockchain technologies are only one category. There's a separate category which is off-blockchain technologies, and both of these are important, and we'll see in a moment why. And just for clarity, Monetas is the company that I work for, that I founded a few years ago. So what are blockchains? The past few years, since 2009, when we've talked about blockchains, we've had lots of technical explanations with mathematics and white papers and so on, and it confuses people. People say, I don't understand it, so I don't want to get involved. And it's holding back involvement and mainstream adoption. I think it's a mistake to get too detailed about things. If you want to sell a car, you don't start with a paper on the physics of internal combustion engines. You just say, here are the keys, get in the car, smell the leather, feel how the car sits on the road, imagine yourself driving with your best friend. That's how you sell a car. You don't need to explain how the engine works. We need to focus on the benefits. But if you do want to explain, keep it simple. Keep it so simple that everybody can understand it, that a 10-year-old kid can understand it. We need the technical explanations for a different audience, for the people that are building the systems, and a lot of those are here. So we will hear those technical things later in the afternoon. But for a general audience, a blockchain is a decentralized consensus database. So it's a database. It's a place where you enter information. And the difference from databases in the past is that these use decentralized consensus. So a traditional database is like an Excel spreadsheet. Anybody can go and if there's an amount entered there, they can change the amount. They don't need permission from anyone else. Or if it's permission, it's human permission. There's no technological constraint that prevents them from changing that. So if a bank uses an Excel spreadsheet with a column of customer names and a column of balances, an employee can go in there and say, you know, I need a bit of extra money this month. This guy looks like he's got a lot of money. I'm going to take a little bit. He's not going to notice. And I'll put that in my account. And nothing holds them back except ethics and compliance procedures. So because of that, we need all this compliance infrastructure to prevent it, which makes it expensive and slow. And the invention and the Bitcoin innovation is that you need a large consensus. You need a whole worldwide community to agree on what the entries in the database are. And if they all agree, it's very difficult. It's basically impossible to change anything unless everybody first agrees. That gives them the security, and that's the importance of the Bitcoin invention. And it can be used for many different things, not just for money. We'll get to that in a moment. So And so how they work, if you do a transaction in a database, and a transaction doesn't have to be financial, it can be any information that needs to be changed, you need to basically have the whole community agree to that new state of the database. So if you want to use it as an ownership system, like a currency or a property registry, then the transfers happen by agreeing that consensus. I really like this particular image for Bitcoin because it captures a number of important elements. The motto for Bitcoin is vires in numeris, which is a Latin phrase that means strength in numbers. And usually that's interpreted as it uses cryptography. Cryptography is mathematics and numbers, and you get strength from relying on mathematics. But that's only half the story. The other half of the story is the mathematics alone is not what makes Bitcoin the important invention that it is. It's the fact that there's so many human beings that are operating computers all over the world, and these human beings agree on what the consensus state of the database is. So it's the technological element, the cryptography, strength in numbers, and there's the human element, strength in numbers, lots of people agreeing. And both those need to be present, and this is important to keep in mind. And the third thing is that it looks like a gold coin. Bitcoin cannot be inflated, so it's like gold. There's a limited quantity, and that makes it secure, it's non-political, and inflation-proof. What are off-blockchain systems? Similarly, staying at a simple level, they are decentralized transaction platforms. And how do they work? In off-blockchain transactions, you have a deterministic process that determines the state of the database. So just to get back to how blockchain databases work, it's not a completely deterministic process because one part is the technology, the other part is this huge number of this community that says we have to agree on what that status is. So if I want to do a transaction with one other person, it's not enough for the two of us to be involved. We need the entire community to agree. But in off-blockchain systems, you do not need that entire community. If I want to do a transaction with somebody, the only people that need to agree is me and the transaction party. And the software, plus the two transaction parties, or however many transaction parties there are, that's all you need. So this makes them way more efficient. So how do these technologies fit together? They are complementary and synergistic. We need both types of technologies. And this is being recognized increasingly by thought leaders in the Bitcoin space. Nick Szabo, for example, recently did a podcast that makes exactly this point. And as some of you may know, there's many people that believe that Nick Szabo is Satoshi Nakamoto, or at least the leader of the team that calls itself Satoshi Nakamoto. Very smart guy. Certainly we know that he wrote the thing that was published just before Bitcoin. It's extremely similar to Bitcoin. So he himself says this is what you need. You need two types of systems. You need different layers that do different things, and together they make a complete ecosystem. So what are blockchain advantages? Blockchains are good for decentralized consensus. They're good for uncensorable records and for public auditability. So there are different applications. For example, you can create inflation-proof currencies, such as Bitcoin, or you can use it as a secure voting system. This has already been done. Denmark, last year, used blockchains to do their voting. Not the country itself as a whole, but one of the political parties in Denmark used blockchain technology as a secure electronic voting system. You can also use it as a property registry. So a country like India that does not have a clean, well-ordered registry of land and what belongs to who could use the blockchain to do that. Blockchain disadvantages, as you have gathered already probably now, is that they are slow, and expensive, and they are public. They are slow because they need this huge community of people to agree on the consensus. They are by design slow and expensive. There's huge resources needed for every transaction. And this is one of the problems that's being discussed today. For example, should we adjust the blockchain limit, and so on. And regarding the public point, certain things should be public, but some things should be private. And there's no healthy society that doesn't have a healthy degree of privacy. Privacy is a fundamental human right. We will never have a healthy society that doesn't have a substantial amount of privacy. We need both. We need public transparency, and we need privacy. And blockchains are public. You can do blockchains privately, of course. We will hear more about that from Alex and so on later. But this is the main case. Off-chain advantages are that the transactions are very fast, they're very cheap, and they are private. And this is good for retail transactions, for micropayments, and for resource allocation, which is going to be an extremely important industry that's just starting to develop today with the Internet of Things and related systems. Just to give you an idea, it's not just that this is like 10% or 20% faster or 30% cheaper. These are different worlds. Off-chain transactions execute in less than a hundredth of a second. In fact, we can get it down to milliseconds. This is almost fast enough for high-frequency trading. High-frequency trading, you need to get down to microseconds. We can get it down to milliseconds, and the difference is because of the overhead of cryptography. But this is extremely fast. It's faster than our human perception limit, which is about a tenth of a second. That's 1,000 times faster than blockchains. You can make blockchains efficient all day long, and the next 10 years, they're never going to be that fast, while they still retain the essential characteristics of a blockchain, namely a large community of people. And regarding cost, off-chain systems cost about 1/10,000th of a cent. What do blockchain transaction costs? Well, it depends on which blockchain. The ones that are being developed now, like Ethereum, are a lot cheaper than Bitcoin. But the Bitcoin blockchain costs about $10 per transaction. That's the full cost, because the transaction fee that's charged, which is about 10 cents, is heavily subsidized by mining profits. The cost of operating the whole network divided by the number of transactions is about $10 today. And other blockchains like Litecoin or Ethereum are a lot cheaper than that, but they still cost, in the best case, roughly 10 cents. So off-chain transaction systems are about 1 million times cheaper than blockchain systems, like Ripple and other systems. It's different worlds, and we need both the blockchains and we need the off-chain systems together. And then you have the best of both worlds. You can store assets securely on the blockchain. That's what you want. When you have a public property database, you don't want somebody to just be able to change that. That's where it makes sense to have it on the blockchain. Everybody can see this belongs to that person. You can prove it. Public auditability. Store assets securely on the chain and transact the assets efficiently off-chain. So when you combine and integrate these technologies, then you have the best. You have secure storage and extremely efficient transactions. This is what Nick Szabo is talking about. So that's crypto finance technologies. But then there's another development that's happened in the last 20 to 30 years, and that's the mobile phone. Today, everybody in the world has a mobile phone. Even the poorest people have mobile phones. And in fact, it's funny, poor people are more likely to have a phone than people in developed countries. You'll see people that have absolutely nothing. They have shreds of clothing on their body, but they'll have a phone, a mobile phone. And it's not just a feature phone anymore. Today, if you go to Africa, it's hard to find a store that sells a feature phone. If you go to Kenya, they don't sell feature phones. They only sell smartphones. Smartphones now cost about $20 or $30 for an Android phone. That's cheaper than what feature phones used to be. So basically, everybody in the world today has a smartphone. It's the first time in history that we have a global distribution platform. So now you combine crypto finance with the world's first global distribution platform. That's an amazingly powerful combination. So the mobile phone combined with crypto finance becomes the enabler of freedom and wealth creation. So imagine this guy in the past, before the mobile phone, before crypto finance. He could be the world's greatest genius. He would not get very far. He would barely be able to make enough to eat every day. But today, with the mobile phone and crypto finance, accessible right from his mobile phone, access to all the world's knowledge via the internet, the most advanced trading systems, secure cryptography that enables him to do business with somebody in China that he's never met, he will never meet, and he has security that he's not going to be cheated on that transaction. And he has security of property, so he can invest and start building and getting up the ladder. And he's integrated with the world economy via the mobile phone. So now, talented people in the 2/3 of the world that are currently excluded from the financial system, they can start and build themselves up with no limit. There's no limit to what they can become. So where will this lead us? We will see a radical transformation of financial systems, of communication systems, of production systems, and of governments and legal systems. And essentially, the transformation is going to be away from coercive monopolies towards competitive service providers. So when we're teenagers, we think that all the old things, all the existing systems are bad, and there's lots of teenagers that are anarchists, like just get rid of parents, get rid of the government, get rid of banks, and the world will be a better place. But as we know, when we grow a bit older, revolutions that throw the old out are almost always a bad idea. They usually take us back. The sensible way is evolution and transformation. Banks are going to be here, governments are going to be here, but we can transform how they operate. Just like democracy has made huge differences to how governments operate. And this is going to take us the next step forward. We'll have governments that are more competitive, that are more service-oriented. Customers are going to be higher. The differences in power are going to be smaller, and that's healthy. When we have these huge disparities, it's not healthy. It leads to social stress. And as a result of all these changes, we'll have an explosion of wealth creation. And with that, we can address the world's problems. We're always going to have problems, but this is going to take us a huge step further than where we are today. The world of the future, which is not very far away, we are building it today. Many of the people here are entrepreneurs that are involved in this industry. This is the world we're building today. We're going to see more people than ever before in history live together in peace, freedom, and prosperity. Thank you. Soll ich bleiben?
Okay, thank you so much. Now we understand what you understand about helping create a better world. It's really impressive. Are there any questions in the audience? We have a microphone there, and I think somewhere in the back. I don't see anybody. Okay,
yes.
So thank you very much. There is one.
Mark Lucy.
Okay.
So maybe for me all went a bit too fast, so maybe it's a stupid question. But I was just thinking, I'm around like in these countries you mentioned, like Brazil and China, and exactly like trading there, doing business. It's difficult because you might be cheated, most probably. But still, you know, if I buy assets, property there, via crypto or via blockchain, still have not fully understood, like, I mean, the property is still there, so if I buy something there, maybe a house or whatever, still I have the same risk as before.
Yes.
Because if somebody decides...
I'll make 2 points around that. The first is, if you look at physical things that you trade. Like you buy, let's say I order bananas from a Central American country. And then they either don't send the bananas, or they send less than what I ordered, or when they arrive they are rotten. Not the deal that we agreed to. So then the question is, well, what mechanism do you have to enforce that? And how this is going to work is through smart contracts. The transaction platforms that I mentioned there, and they are excellent transaction platforms both on the blockchain side, for example Ethereum, and on the off-blockchain side. And they use smart contracts. And one of the most important smart contracts are escrow contracts. So in other words, when I order something from somewhere, the platform, the contract itself, the software, will take my money when I pay it. It actually goes and is held by the software. And the other party does not receive it, but they can see that the money is there. The software can prove to them the money is there. Then they can send the goods, knowing that the money is there, and that I cannot take back the money. And then when the goods arrive, there'll be a delivery process. FedEx or whoever delivers it will require me to sign that I've received the goods and that they are in good order. And once I've received it, the money is released to the other party. If the goods arrive and they are not in order, then I file a dispute. And that's part of the process. You'll define an arbitration entity, some judge, not a conventional judge, but an arbiter. And there'll be a procedure. They'll look at the case and say, are you lying, or is it really like this? And they have to make a decision how much money goes to which party. Maybe the supplier gets 50%. You have to come to some agreement. So that's the conventional system using physical goods. But there's a very important point. We are moving away from physical goods. Already today, the majority of what happens in the world today in terms of economic activity is digital and non-tangible goods. And increasingly, from the non-tangible goods, it's digital goods. If we go back 10,000 years, everything was physical, or almost everything was physical. There was still intellectual ideas. And agriculture was 97% of the economy or more, 99%. And then 2 centuries ago with the Industrial Revolution, we had a shift away from agriculture towards manufacturing. And manufacturing became 70% of the economy, agriculture was about 25%. And now with the information technology revolution and services revolution, we are seeing that already across the world, services, which are not tangible, are more than 70% of the economy. Manufacturing is less than 20%, and agriculture is less than 3%. And this trend is just going to accelerate. So we are moving very rapidly into a time when virtually everything that's meaningful in the economy is digital. So these technologies that we're building are ideally suited for digital goods and services. Software, for example, is completely digital. When you send the software, you can have other software check through, for example, hashes, that this is the software that you ordered and that it operates the way you want it. So then these electronic and digital cryptographic payment systems and contracting systems are ideal. They give you total security over your property. So yes, there is still a problem with physical things because they involve people and governance systems. China is not, India is not, Chile is not the United States or Switzerland. Each country has different governance systems, and those make a big difference. But we are moving into an age when that's becoming less and less important.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, here. Last one. Hi, Johann. What's your biggest barrier to adoption?
Enough people to help us roll this out. Really. Because, 3 years ago when we started this, we were kind of concerned maybe we'll have a lot of opposition from incumbents in business and government. For example, big financial institutions or the government and so on. And our strategy at Monetas from day one, 3 years ago, was we need to identify who might feel threatened by these technologies and then proactively develop relationships with them and figure out solutions. Because we don't want something like what happened in the music industry, when the music industry is fighting technology and is fighting a trend that is not going to go away. They're just hurting themselves and everybody gets upset. So we had a strategy of let's cooperate, let's partner. And it wasn't immediately obvious how that would work, but that was our goal. And it's amazing how well that has worked. We are now partnering with central banks. We have central banks next month, in 2 weeks, Monetas is going live in Africa, across a whole country. The central bank is behind it, the National Post Office is behind it. We are in discussions with banks, big top 20 global banks that want to use our technology. So a partnership approach is what's needed. So we're not scared about hurdles of government and so on holding us back. The people that are mature about this and have looked at this realize this is the future. We just need to figure out a way that it's going to work for everybody. And we need more people to get involved. We need more programmers, we need more people with marketing, and we need to do business development. That's really the biggest hurdle. And so we're going to places where they have nothing, where the need is greatest, like Africa. And these guys are totally thrilled. They're trying to get us there because they can see that this is going to bring huge benefits to them.
Okay, thank you very much. And the great news is you have 250 multiplicators already who will share your views and talk about it later. Thank you very much, Johann.
Thank you.